Welcome to The Explainer, everyone. Today we're diving into a really fascinating and honestly deeply revealing look at the myth versus the reality of one of history's most romanticized figures. We're going to completely deconstruct the legend of Lawrence of Arabia. And you know what the absolute craziest part is? We're doing it by relying strictly on his own words, his very own confessions, and the documented historical source text. So get ready to rethink everything you thought you knew, because the gap between the celebrated legend and the historical reality, it's absolutely staggering.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Section 1, the Damascus photo, end of the deception.
Picture this. It's October of 1918, and we're looking out from the balcony of the Victoria Hotel in Damascus. The source text sets the scene with this incredibly famous photograph of the English intelligence colonel, the guy the whole world knows as Lawrence of Arabia. In this exact moment, he's framed as the ultimate victorious commander of the Arab revolt. It's the picture of triumph, right? The exact image that history just loves to highlight.
But here is where the narrative takes a really sharp turn. Literally 30 minutes after that victorious photograph was snapped, just half an hour, he submitted his resignation from the army of the Great Arab Revolt. Why so fast? Well, according to the source, Britain's objectives had been entirely achieved. The deception was complete. His mission was officially over.
Now, this abrupt departure leaves us with a massive, glaring question. What exactly happened to the Arabs left behind? The source reveals that Lawrence pretty much just packed his bags and headed back to England. He completely abandoned the people who had followed him, the people who actually believed in him, leaving them all alone to face a really dark and uncertain fate. It is a massive reality check when you compare it to that triumphant photo we were just talking about.
Moving on to Section 2, Pillars of Wisdom, Confessions of the Spy.
So, jump to 1920, when Lawrence began writing his famous book, 7 Pillars of Wisdom. The source text is crystal clear here. This book wasn't just some standard memoir. It was a flat-out confession. In it, he openly admitted his true role as a British intelligence colonel and agent. He frankly detailed how he exploited the naivety of the Arabs, intentionally deceiving them to serve British interests. And his primary target the whole time? To strike at and destroy the Ottoman Caliphate. He wasn't their savior. He was a highly effective operative executing a very calculated plan.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the specific language he used in those memoirs to describe his own followers. He literally referred to the very people who fought alongside him as mere riffraff and barbarians. It is honestly jarring to read. I mean, this isn't the language of a devoted comrade. It's the vocabulary of an agent who viewed his so-called allies with deep condescension.
And the deception ran even deeper, right down to the very clothes he wore. He actually wrote that these followers were easily deceived with just a smile, wearing their clothes which I despised. Think about that stark contradiction for a second. The visual of him in traditional Arab garments is absolutely iconic. It's the whole cornerstone of his romanticized image. Yet secretly, he completely despised the clothing, using it merely as a manipulative prop to win their trust.
And this brilliantly illustrates what might be his proudest yet most cynical boast. He talked about the true cost of this mission, bragging that all of his objectives were met and funded entirely by Arab blood without a single drop of British soldiers' blood being spilled. From an intelligence and strategic standpoint for Britain, it was a flawless execution. But from a human standpoint, it highlights a stunning, almost unbelievable level of exploitation.
Let's look at the aftermath in Section 3, A Quiet Life and a Sudden End.
Following the war, the source text notes that Lawrence retreated to a very quiet, peaceful life. He lived in a cozy cottage north of Bovington, comfortably enjoying a government pension provided by his country. So geographically and emotionally, he's living this incredibly tranquil existence, completely far removed from the victims of his grand geopolitical schemes over in the Middle East.
To put the timeline in perspective, by 1920, he's cementing his own narrative by writing his famous book. Post-war, as we said, he's living comfortably on a pension in that quiet Bovington cottage. But then, in 1935, the story ends incredibly suddenly. At just 46 years old, he died in a motorcycle crash. The source details that he was driving at reckless speeds near Oxford, literally just returning home from a quick trip to the post office. It's crazy to think that such a mundane errand violently ended the life of one of that era's most consequential figures. Which brings us to our final part. Section 4, Lawrence's Legacy, Hero or Deceiver?
The facts surrounding his farewell are incredibly telling. He was buried at Morton Cemetery following a grand, majestic funeral. And you know, this wasn't some quiet send-off. It was a major event attended by prominent political and military figures alongside the absolute elite symbols of British society. Winston Churchill himself was there. Lawrence was honored at the highest possible levels of the empire he served.
So, the crucial point is this staggering disconnect we're left with. The historical reality shows he abandoned the Arabs to a dark fate after heavily exploiting them. Yet the empire memorialized him with immense reverence. They even went as far as erecting a bust of him in front of St. Paul's Cathedral in London, officially framing his legacy as that of a loyal crusader. A loyal crusader for the empire, of course, entirely detached from the massive deception he orchestrated on the ground.
Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder. We've looked strictly at the source material today, heavily featuring his own confessions and his own admissions. We've seen the calculated deception, the carefully manufactured image, and the ultimate human cost. So based on his own words, how will you remember Lawrence of Arabia? Is he the hero of the myth or the deceiver of the reality? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this deep dive encourages you to always look a little closer at exactly how our historical myths are constructed.